Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed.
After freezing all funding to the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, the Trump administration has just announced another bombshell change in its Middle East policy. The White House has officially closed the PLO's offices in Washington, D.C., accusing the Palestinians of ceasing to pursue a meaningful peace with Israel. Staffers in the D.C. office have been given notice that they have 1 month to leave the premises, effective immediately. This is the latest and possibly most severe move by Team Trump with reference to the Palestinians as of late. Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, have largely hailed these efforts, though. After learning that the PLO's office was being closed for good, Netanyahu issued the statement, quote, "The United States made the correct decision regarding the PLO mission in Washington. Israel supports American actions that are designed to make it clear to the Palestinians that refusing to negotiate and attempts to attack Israel in international forums will not advance peace," end quote. This decision also comes just a few days after the Trump administration cut some $25 million in aid monies that was being used to fund Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem. For Palestinian leaders, the writing is on the wall. Most have unanimously declared the United States an enemy of the Palestinian people, a war chant that first started last year with Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Following that decision, the Palestinians largely withdrew from negotiations with the United States. The White House retaliated with a series of budget cuts that ultimately led to the total freezing of all funds to the UNRWA and the news that Trump's team was seeking an end to the Palestinians' unique status as a refugee people.
But how can anyone in their sane mind, with all these American decisions, Trump's decisions, believe that these people can be honest brokers, facilitators, arbitrators in any peace process? They are no longer partners in the peace process.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is reportedly considering severing all ties, including pivotal security communications with the United States, following the closure of the PLO's offices. For now, it remains to be seen whether these tactics will ultimately force the Palestinians back to the negotiating table or not. Palestinian leaders have just officially filed a claim of war crimes against Israel at the International Criminal Court, known as the ICC. This is ostensibly the highest-level court system in the world, tasked with investigating potential war crimes committed by foreign governments. In this case, the Palestinians are urging the ICC to investigate Israel's plan to demolish a Bedouin village in the West Bank, one which the state claims was illegally built. The village in question, Khan al-Ahmar, was officially greenlit for demolition earlier this month following the High Court's go-ahead. This particular village has been mired in legal red tape for years now, with both sides bitterly fighting in court. The 173 Bedouin who lived in the village are said to originally be from a Negev village in southern Israel. The State of Israel relocated them to the Palestinian West Bank sometime in the 1950s, where the families have remained ever since. Several years ago, the residents began erecting makeshift tents to live in, and Israeli officials say these structures were built illegally without Israeli permission or permits. But the residents argue that they had no other option and nowhere else to go, considering the state originally evicted them in the first place with no resettlement option.
هم بدعوا انهم بدهم يحسنوا الحاله المعيشيه لهالسكان التجمع، ولكن عندما ذهبنا الى اول تجمع اللي هو في منطقه شرقي العزريه هو موجود على محل قمامه لا يصلح للعيش البشري.
Israel has received considerable pressure to reverse the demolition order following the High Court's decision earlier this month, and the chief negotiator of the Palestinians, Saeb Erekat, says that such a demolition constitutes war crimes, a matter that will now be left to the ICC over whether or not to investigate. United States National Security Advisor John Bolton has threatened the ICC not to attack America's allies on the global stage. Bolton has slammed the courts for being ineffective, unaccountable, and indeed outright dangerous in the past.
Today, on the eve of September the 11th, I want to deliver a clear and unambiguous message on behalf of the President of the United States. The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us.
With the fate of the JCPOA nuclear deal with Iran still in limbo, all sides are bracing for every possible outcome. Iran's economy has undoubtedly taken a massive hit following Trump's withdrawal from the deal and the resuming of the United States sanctions. And the regime now faces the choice of whether to bow to Trump's demands to halt its nuclear development full stop, or else plunge deeper into economic crisis. At this time, Tehran seems to be teetering on either option. The regime's parliament speaker has just stated that Iran possesses some 3,000 to 4,000 active centrifuges capable of fast-capacity uranium enrichment. If true, this number would actually be well below the estimated 9,000 that the regime held prior to entering the landmark JCPOA nuclear deal in 2015. When it comes to this technology, however, quantity is usually not a way to gauge just how quickly a nuclear warhead could come together. Under the current terms of the deal, Iran is allegedly only in possession of older IR-1 centrifuges, which develop uranium relatively slowly. Rumor is, however, that the regime is eyeing construction plans for advanced IR-2, 4, and 6 models, which could potentially ramp up its enrichment capacity fivefold. The United Nations top nuclear watchdog has continued to verify Iran's compliance with the terms stipulated in the JCPOA, of which Russia, China, and the EU are still in accord.
While appreciating the strong support of the international community to the deal, which was also expressed by the overwhelming majority of the states in today's meeting, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always expressed loud and clear that if the deal is to survive, Iran should also be benefited from the deal.
Israeli leaders, however, aren't buying it. Israel's Intelligence and Transportation Minister Israel Katz has gone so far as to threaten a harsh military response if Iran doesn't halt its efforts to develop uranium for the purposes of a nuclear war. According to Katz, Iran faces a, quote, direct threat from the United States and its allies, end quote, if the regime pushes forward with its current plans. At this point, many believe a military confrontation will inevitably be the final endgame here, no matter what. All right, now shocking news just now. 2 American women have just accused David Keyes, who serves as the personal spokesperson for Prime Minister Netanyahu, of sexually assaulting them. Keyes has fiercely denied these allegations, and he's also pointed out that the testimony of one woman, New York Senate candidate Julia Salazar, shouldn't be trusted, considering that she has lied about her credentials in the past. Salazar, who is mere days away from the state Senate election, shared her account of the allegations on social media. She writes that, quote, "I've been informed that a story is about to run which identifies me as a victim of sexual assault. Before this runs, I want to come forward and confirm that I was a victim of sexual assault by David Keyes, the Prime Minister of Israel's spokesperson to foreign media," end quote. Media sources now claim that Salazar originally submitted a sexual assault complaint against Keyes anonymously in 2016 over an incident that allegedly took place in 2013 before his appointment as Netanyahu's spokesman. But Keyes has already denounced Salazar's accusations, citing her past history of unsubstantiated or misleading claims. Salazar recently claimed on the campaign trail that she was brought up as Jewish, only to have her own brother refute the claim, saying, quote, "Nobody in our immediate family," end quote, was Jewish. She also campaigned on the basis that she was an immigrant from Colombia, a statement which was later revealed to be untrue. According to Keyes, these false statements are reason enough to doubt Salazar's reliability. But it should be noted that Salazar did share her story privately with friends as early as 2016. And now, mere hours after Salazar came forward, a second woman has claimed that she too was sexually assaulted by Keyes. This second allegation comes from Shandy Race, a writer for the Wall Street Journal. Race wrote on Twitter, quote, "I also had a terrible encounter with David Keyes once and 100% believe Salazar. The man had absolutely no conception of the word no. No matter how often I said no, he wouldn't stop pushing himself on me." Needless to say, these are very extreme allegations, especially given the massive movement of women and men combating sexual assault in the age of Me Too. But for now, it remains to be seen whether any formal charges will be filed against Keyes, or even whether the Prime Minister's office will look into these allegations internally. Once in a while, Israelis make global headlines for accidentally flying through airport security with leftover bullets in their luggage. After all, most Israelis are former IDF soldiers, which typically explains why a stray bullet or two ended up in their old bags. But this latest incident at New Jersey's Newark Airport might really take the cake. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with more. Now, Brett, exactly what happened?
Okay, so if I had to describe in just a few words what happened, I'd say it's somewhere between a mass panic and a very, very bad joke. Okay, so the story goes like this. Okay, so a 50-year-old Israeli man, he's now been identified as Elon Feldman, was apparently flying from Tel Aviv to Panama City, Florida with a connection Newark, like you said. So, you know, like the rest of us, he had to recheck his baggage through security once he arrived in Newark for that domestic connection to Florida. But when his bags passed through security, pretty much the entire airport ground to a halt, because right there in his carry-on luggage in the X-ray was what appeared to be a fully armed and fully functional bomb. And needless to say, TSA security immediately jumped into action. Elon was detained and questioned by police, and practically the entire airport was shut down while bomb sappers checked it, only to finally find out that it was totally fake. It was a fake bomb.
Completely fake.
Yes.
But realistic looking enough to seem entirely real.
Correct.
All right, so, you know, this begs the question. Why was this guy traveling with a fake bomb? Why did he try to pass it through security so nonchalantly? How did he even get to Newark?
Sure, well, I can certainly only speak to his account of the story anyway and what the police say. So Feldman later claimed that he was on his way to his security training conference in Panama City. So in fact, he was specifically traveling to a bomb detection training conference, which may at least partially explain why he had a simulation bomb, as it turned out, in his bag. As to why he tried to pass through TSA security with zero heads up, I honestly can't tell you that. And as absurd as this kind of thing is, the TSA is not laughing. In fact, Feldman's been slapped with criminal charges for this, and he may face another slew of fines and even more charges. Even if the device was fake, it was designed to resemble the real thing, which spurs all the necessary terror-related security measures. I mean, that costs the agency money, the airline money, the airport money. That causes massive delays on the runway. I think 300 people were displaced from their flights.
Sure.
And that's why he's been charged with creating a false public alarm and interfering with transportation. Those are the official charges. So obviously that's nothing to laugh about right there.
No, I mean, definitely not. I mean, especially since he apparently didn't alert the TSA to what he was doing before he did it. Officials say that at the very least, you know, Feldman should have known better than to bring a realistic-looking simulation bomb through an active checkpoint in the middle of the day. I'm sure that gave people quite a scare, and so, you know, charges are understandable. Anyway, thanks for the report, Brett.
Sure.
All right, well, as you probably know, Jews all over the world just celebrated Rosh Hashanah, otherwise known as the Jewish New Year. As the Hebrew calendar rolls over to the year 5779, the total number of Jews worldwide has also risen since last year. The Hebrew University says that there are now nearly 14.7 million Jews living all over the world, with the majority living right here in the state of Israel. It probably comes as no surprise that Israel is the single largest home to Jews anywhere in the world. But here's a surprising statistic. There are actually more Jews living outside of Israel in the diaspora than those living inside. About 1.5 million more, in fact. 6.6 million Jews currently live in Israel, with 8.1 million Jews living outside of Israel, 5.7 million of whom live in the United States. Well, no matter where they live, millions of Jewish families were gathering Sunday night to celebrate the Jewish New Year with some apples and honey. Even the United Nations celebrated the festivity by recreating the ritual throwing of sins into the river, which in this case was New York's East River. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Dani Danon, led the ceremony, which would be followed by the Cheshbon HaNefesh ritual of soul-searching. Dozens of ambassadors, including UN Chief Antonio Guterres, were there to take part. The joy of Rosh Hashanah culminates next week with the Hebrew Yom Kippur holiday, one of the most solemn of the Jewish year, a day of reflecting and asking for atonement for our sins. From all of us at ILTV, we hope the new year is a sweet one for each and every one of you. All right, tensions are reaching a fever pitch at the Bedouin village of Khan al-Ahmar. Israel's High Court upheld a ruling earlier this month that the village had been illegally built in contested territory in the West Bank and would therefore be demolished in the coming days. Now, ahead of that slated demolition, Israeli security teams have just destroyed 5 trailers set up on the outskirts of the village by Palestinian protesters, a sign that the full order may soon be imminent. The small Bedouin village of Khan al-Ahmar has a population of less than 200 people, but the tiny community has already sparked headlines all over the world. The fate of the village has been mired in a fierce legal battle for many years now. Its inhabitants are said to originally be Bedouins from Israel's Negev, who were removed by the Israeli government sometime in the 1950s and relocated to the West Bank just outside of Jerusalem. The families claim that with nowhere to go and no instructions, they had no choice but to construct their own homes, schools, and prayer spaces using tents and trash. But now, in a landmark ruling, the High Court has deemed these structures to be illegal, slating the entire village for demolition. Mere days ago, the Palestinians took this issue to the international courts, calling the move a war crime. For now, it remains to be seen if the ICC will actually open an investigation into this case. What is clear, though, is that this small village has quickly captured the world's attention as a difficult and complex metaphor for the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the IDF's removal of protesters from the area, done under the cover of night, is a big sign that the government intends to raze this village to the ground, regardless of international interests. Many believe the demolition will take place within the coming days, if not hours. Today marks the day that 25 years ago, Israeli and Palestinian leaders convened at the White House for an unprecedented occasion, the signing of the Oslo Accords. Some saw Oslo as a major step backwards for peace, and others as an incredible ray of hope for it. But regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, the signing of Oslo was undoubtedly one of the most unforgettable occasions of the 20th century. And ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with a brief look back at Oslo.
Hi, thanks, Aaron. So, as we know, the Oslo Accords, along with everything that led up to them and followed them, is a pretty significant cornerstone of world history. And 25 years later, that legacy is still fiercely debated in both Israeli and Palestinian societies. Because for some, those accords were seen as betrayals from both sides by leaders who compromised too much for the other. And others recall that time as maybe the most hopeful either society had ever felt that there could be a real lasting peace. But history is kind of an ethereal poetry to itself sometimes because, of course, today, almost 25 years later, instead of Israeli and Palestinian leaders meeting at the White House to sign an accord, the current White House has just closed the PLO's offices and ejected them from D.C. So history really comes full circle sometimes.
Yeah, well, one of the more interesting things about Oslo is, of course, how it all came together in the first place. I understand that there's actually a new documentary premiering on HBO today about that.
Yeah, correct. So that film's called The Oslo Diaries. It's an Israeli film directed by Mo Laushi and Daniel Sivan. It actually premiered back at Sundance in January and was immediately snatched up by HBO for a pretty big deal. So the doc isn't political, it's more of an inside look at how those secret talks physically came together back in the 90s, featuring all kinds of rare, never-before-seen footage from the period. And much of the material actually comes from diaries of people who were in the room on all sides of those negotiations, American, Israeli, Palestinian, whatever, stuff that's never been seen before. So notably, it also features the final on-screen interview with Shimon Peres, which I think is pretty special. And I think 2 days after he shot that interview, he was rushed to the hospital where, of course, he would pass away sometime later. Peres was, of course, instrumental to the negotiation and signing of the Oslo Accords. He had very much a front row seat. So I think that his insight in that final interview is probably just about as intimate and as inside a look as you can get about Oslo.
I mean, it sounds incredible, very interesting. And even though Israel is becoming more and more famous for its series on Netflix, like Fauda and Mossad 101, I think the country makes some of the most interesting and complex documentaries out there too. And this one sounds really fascinating. But on that note, thanks for the story, Brett.
Of course.
Well, the final word is finally in. Tel Aviv has been chosen as the official home of Eurovision 2019. The semifinal for the world's favorite song competition will commence on May 14th of next year, with the final showdown and the grand finale set for May 18th. So get your DVRs ready, or better still, book your flight now and fly on in for a front row seat. This announcement comes from the Eurovision organizers and broadcasters themselves and brings with it a wave of relief to Israelis. Israel first won hosting duties earlier this year when local superstar Netta Barzilai wowed the judges with her Eurovision-winning song, Toy. Barzilai has since gone on to seal international record deals, top the song charts, and grace the American stage with the United States tour. Eurovision isn't as big a deal to most Americans as it is to the rest of the world, but that's all changed now that Toy is stuck in our heads. Now, Eurovision organizers say Tel Aviv beat out both Jerusalem and Eilat for hosting duties because of its extra-large convention center. But there was some stress over Eurovision when Israel initially insisted on having the event hosted in Jerusalem too. In fact, Eurovision has been hosted in Jerusalem several times in the past with no problem. But this year, Eurovision organizers wanted a guarantee that the government wouldn't politicize the event. Eurovision's official announcement comes with a decree addressed to Prime Minister Netanyahu himself that there will be freedom of movement and security afforded to everyone involved with Eurovision, so long as the competition's values are upheld. But I think it goes without saying that at the end of the day, Israelis are just stoked to see the shindig finally return to their country. You can bet on weeks of parties and preparations before, during, and after Eurovision next May, so we'll see you there. All right, now it's time for ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh for this week's Top 5.
With the holiday of Rosh Hashanah behind us, the next big Jewish holiday in line is Yom Kippur, also known as the Day of Atonement. This day is considered to be the holiest day of the Jewish year, centering around the themes of atonement and repentance. So I'm here with the top 5 Yom Kippur traditions. First on the list is the start to the holiday, the big festive family dinner. Just like Yom Kippur is the day of fasting, the day before is set aside for eating, preparing food for the holiday. This meal is considered to be the concluding meal, getting you ready for the big fast ahead. No food or water. The Yom Kippur fast after the meal, which lasts for a 24-hour period, is meant to enable us to ignore our physical desires, focusing instead on our spiritual needs. Along with fasting, people also avoid wearing leather shoes, applying lotions or cream, and washing or bathing. So, good luck on the fast, everyone. Second up is Kol Nidre, meaning annulment of vows, which is a declaration that is recited in synagogue before the Yom Kippur. This is chanted by Jews solely on Yom Kippur and is meant to cancel and annul all unintended vows made to God during the previous year. So, this is definitely the time to think back to some of those unrealistic vows I made last year, huh? Third up is the shofar. The holiday of Yom Kippur ends with a single long blast of the shofar. The blowing of the shofar at the conclusion of Yom Kippur is the culmination of a day spent fasting and praying for a sweet new year. It's meant to symbolize the end of a long, hard fast and period of forgiveness and welcomes us into the new year. Fourth on the list of traditions is wearing all white. Traditionally, many Jews wear a white shirt on Yom Kippur due to the fact that white is a symbol of purity, and Yom Kippur is a day where we undertake a spiritual cleansing. Everyone looks clean, calm, and ready to start the new year fresh. Last but not least is the complete silence of the country. In Israel on Yom Kippur, you won't see a single car, bus, train, or any other type of vehicle on the road. All public transportation is shut down, and people roam the streets freely with no worries. Kids grab their bikes and ride down the highway with no problem, and you'll often see families filling the streets and enjoying the quiet. If you've never been to Israel on Yom Kippur, it's quite a sight to see. And with that, that's all for today's Top 5. Back to you.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.